An Affliction of the Heart, Volume 2, by Anonymous Pegasus. Chapter 5, Royalty. Kuna and Warren walked side by side, hooves kicking up puffs of dust from the barren, dry ground. The earth was the color of mud, but there was no moisture here. Not in the Badlands. It had been a full day since they had departed from the train at the stop closest to the Badlands, Dodge City. Colonel had opted to take the form of an earth pony for the trip, one of the regular forms that Warren was beginning to recognize. This iteration of Kuno was a little larger than Warren, with a yellow coat and brown mane. She was singularly unimpressive and unremarkable, and that was fine with her. Warren's limp had become ever more pronounced the further south they went. He denied it, but his gimpy leg was paining him quite badly. "So, how are we gonna find your Ellies?" Warren asked between clenched teeth, trying to make his tone seem normal. "Oh, they'll find us," Kuno replied confidently. "Couldn't ask Celestia or check the library?" Warren asked breathlessly. Coupled with the pain, he was severely unfit from never doing any exercise other than planting seeds and collecting berries. "Celestia still thinks we're all hatched from a single mother," Kuno said with an exasperated shake of her head. Warren mulled that over for several long seconds. "So, no eggs then?" Kuno shook her head, pursing her lips. Warren gave a long-suffering sigh. And here I was thinking of the world's largest omelet. "So," Warren asked, as they walked side by side down a narrow canyon, "what makes you think that Chrysalis would know all this stuff?" "She is the queen," Kuno pointed out with a helpless shrug of her shoulders. "If any pony knows, it would be Chrysalis." "And Chrysalis is definitely here in the Badlands?" Warren queried. Kuno nodded grimly. "I can sense her. I was part of the hive for a brief time, but I established a link with the collective when I was. It doesn't take much to probe the link." "What's that feel like, anyhow?" Warren asked curiously. Kuno frowned at that, looking thoughtful. "Well, it's sort of like 1,000 voices whispering in the back of your mind. It's really just white noise until you focus on a single whisper to understand. Sort of like trying to hear a single conversation in a crowded room. It's all just background noise." Warren gave a nod at that, pausing and then sitting down on his rump with a heavy sigh. "I need a rest." Kuno turned back towards him, sighing and shaking her head, moving to sit beside him. "You shouldn't have come with me. You should have stayed home and got your Aurora farm growing." Grimacing faintly, Warren dropped down onto his stomach and stretched his bat hoof out, giving a faint groan of relief. "You know I'm not going to let you out of my sight like that." "Afraid I won't come back?" Kuno asked teasingly. Warren went silent for a long moment, looking at his forehoofs. Kuno frowned, nudging her nose against his cheek gently. "You don't really think that, do you?" "I know it's stupid," Warren admitted, frowning at his hooves, rubbing the dust with his good one. "But every time I think of you going somewhere, my heart skips a beat, and I think I might not ever see you again." Kuno made a soft, apologetic sound, throwing her hooves around his neck and squeezing gently. "I'm not going anywhere, Warden." "Chrysalis might have other ideas." Warren looked up at Kuno, his ears dropping. "She couldn't keep me from you with her entire army," Kuno said, confidently, purring softly and nuzzling into his neck. Warren lifted his good hoof to hook around Kuno's middle, hugging her gently. "You know we could adopt, right?" Kuno nodded gently, setting her jaw. "But it wouldn't be the same. I want a foal. I want your foal." Blinking once, Warren tilted his head to the side. "Why is it so important to you?" "What's the closest two ponies can ever get?" Kuno asked suddenly. Warren gave the changeling a long stare. "I guess hugging? Kissing? Sex?" Kuno nodded gently, and then gave him a level stare, locking her eyes with his own. "That's what intimacy is. Two ponies trying to occupy the same space. Even if just for an instant. That's what physical love is to me. It's two ponies getting so close that they truly touch. Everything we do, when we kiss, our saliva doesn't really mix. Our tongues don't meld. Our hooves don't really connect because they still belong to us. But a foal is part of us both. It's proof that we came together for an instant, that our essences mixed.
Warren nodded at that, gently nuzzling his cheek against her neck, slowly. I keep forgetting how deep you can be sometimes.
I hide it behind goofiness,
Kuno said calmly, smiling and kissing his cheek.
If there was ever a pony I wanted to get that intimate with, it's you, Warden. I want us to truly connect.
And? Warren asked, pressing her for more with a knowing smile on his face.
Handfuls are cute,
Kuno added with a helpless smile.
Plus, you and I, the foal will be a walking heart attack factory.
Warren nodded, gently nosing into his fiancée's neck.
I'm very proud of you, Warden,
Kuno said quietly. Warren blinked once, raising a brow. Kuno gave him a long, sober stare, before breaking into a goofy grin.
All of those openings, and you didn't make a single lewd joke.
A cold night spent cuddled up to each other, in the light of the glowing coals, and Warren and Kuno had progressed further into the Badlands than Warren had ever wanted to go. It had been miles since they had seen the last thing. There was no grass here, just dust, and jagged rocks thrusting themselves up through the earth like teeth.
I wish Sunshine was still alive,
Kuno said suddenly. Warren blinked once, unsure what to make of that. What?
I killed him far too quickly,
Kuno said simply.
If it weren't for him, we'd be there and back by now.
How far is it even to the hive? Warren asked glumly, kicking a stone. Kuno paused at that, looking thoughtful.
A while yet. At least another few hours.
After this is over, I'm going to sleep for like 8 years, Warden stated, pausing again and sitting down heavily on his rump, stretching his bad hoof out in front of him. Kuno nodded and splayed herself out beside him.
Kinda glad I chose a darker fur color. You look like you rolled in the mud.
Kuno lifted a hoof, swatting his rump and then giggling at the puff of dust and the outline it left in his dirty fur.
I need a bath,
Warren admitted, nodding once. I might even drag you in with me.
I wouldn't say no,
Kuno replied with a low purr, snuggling up against his side, pushing her way under his wing. You're cute, Warren said with a smile, nuzzling into her neck slowly.
You're just crawling for sex,
Kuno accused, swatting his rump. Warren gave a wry smile at that. Actually, no. I'm a little too tired and worn out for something that strenuous.
A male turning down sex?
Kuno asked with a slow shake of her head, smiling faintly.
Now I really have seen it all.
Eyes fluttering open, Warren stared up and up and up into the eyes of a giant stone wolf. Stone wolves were a rather less publicized version of the timber wolves of the Everfree Forest. Rather than being made of wood, they were composed entirely of jagged stones. A pair of glowing red eyes completed the terrifying ensemble. Warren immediately backpedaled in reflexive fear, kicking the dirt with his hooves, wincing in pain as he stretched his bad hoof, and his wings bumped against the rock behind him. After several long moments, Warren managed to conjugate the fact that there was a changeling standing beside the wolf. Kuno stepped forward calmly, looking up at the stone wolf. She lifted a hoof, and the stone wolf snarled faintly, growling down at her, before leaning in and snuffing her hoof for a moment, eyes narrowing. After a moment, it arfed and took a step backwards. A soft hissing, clicking sound left the changeling, and it made a motion with a hoof.
We have to follow him,
Kuno said calmly. Warren nodded slowly, eyes wide, not taking his eyes off of the wolf.
Is this normal?
Warren whispered to Kuno, motioning towards the wolf, following behind them. Kuno shook her head, whispering back.
Chrysalis was talking about charming the stone wolves, but I didn't think it was possible.
It's kinda creepy, Warren admitted quietly.
Then it's succeeding in its intent,
Kuno said with a wry smile. Another hour of walking, this time with the stone wolf behind them, and they were at the base of the tower. The tower was a giant black spire of something that looked rather like Kuno's chitin. Hundreds of holes were visible along the sides of the spire, each of them filled with the glowing eyes of changelings, watching the new arrivals. Kuno gave an apologetic look to Warren before a flash of green consumed her, and she reverted back to her natural form. Warren pressed close to his fiancée, afraid of losing her amongst the likenesses. Up and up and up they were led, climbing a winding, zigzagging staircase towards the top of the tower, until they emerged into the throne room. The throne room was a large, open-air platform at the top of the tower. There were 3 giant floor-to-floor ceiling windows that gently tapered into a smooth point at the ceiling. The windows themselves were comprised of what appeared to be hexagonal cells made of glass, giving the world outside a distorted, many-faceted appearance. The stone wolf behind them pressed closer, and Warren jumped in place, yelping as he felt its nose against the small of his back, just above his tail. A large stone paw lifted and pressed down on his back, quickly pinning him to the floor, and the stone wolf slunk up his form until his nose was pressed against his forehead, red eyes staring down into his own. Warren gave a faint whimper. The stone wolf snorted once and then stepped off him, walking towards one of the windows. A flash of green consumed the stone wolf, and when it faded, Chrysalis was standing in its place.
You come into our home, and you bring this with you?
Chrysalis asked flatly. Kuno shrunk back slightly before glancing at Warren, and then puffing her chest up, standing up straight and tall.
He's my fiancé.
Chrysalis raised a brow at that, slowly turning back to face the pair. Her eyes narrowed slowly, and she gave a contemptuous snort.
He loves you despite of your species?
Kuno opened her mouth to respond, and Chrysalis lifted a hoof, halting her.
Let him speak himself. He has the tongue.
Warren swallowed hard at that, his ears pinning back. Yeah, I love her.
You would love a changeling?
Chrysalis asked, pressing close to the Pegasus and trailing a hoof along his wings slowly, whispering into his ear.
You would willingly give yourself to a changeling?
A tingle of magic arced between the Queen and the Pegasus, and Warren quivered faintly, his face slackening. Kuno moved to stop the Queen, and Chrysalis hissed at her dangerously, bringing the smaller changeling up short.
Tell me, Pegasus, you would give up everything for me?
Warren existed in a gray haze, and Kuno was in front of him, asking him these questions. He nodded enthusiastically. I would cross the sky for you, even with a broken wing. Chrysalis withdrew then, and the gray haze dropped. Warren blinked rapidly, lifting a hoof to his head and wincing.
Dumb meat.
Chrysalis stated, waving a hoof dismissively.
It would take an exceptional stupidity to love a changeling. I am unsurprised.
Kuno growled faintly, and Chrysalis rounded on her, eyes narrowing.
You would challenge me?
She asked silkily, her horn crackling with energy. Kuno shrunk back slightly, though her gaze was set. Chrysalis snorted once again, turning away. But before she turned, Warren caught something in her gaze as she stared at Kuno. He thought it might have been envy.
What did you come here for? Are you offering this dumb meat to me?
Chrysalis asked simply. Kuno growled again, splaying her forehooves angrily.
Never.
Then speak, child. What is it?
Chrysalis asked, growling faintly. Kuno trailed off, biting her bottom lip, deflating greatly.
I want to know if it's possible for us to have children.
Chrysalis gave a low, low laugh at that, a building rumble in the back of her throat.
So it is not just the Pegasus who is smitten.
She asked simply, giving a slow, malicious grin.
How different must you be raised where you come from to fall in love with a pony? What delicious irony.
Kuno growled again, stamping a hoof.
I knew this would happen. Warden, we're leaving.
Chrysalis held up a single hoof, and it was a mark of how much power in her presence that had both Kuno and Warren stopped mid-step.
It would be possible. You'd have to be in pony form for the entirety of the conception, the carrying of the foal, and the birth. Any change magic would cause the foal to simply cease to be.
Kuno's ears splayed back at that, and she frowned deeply.
I figured as much, but thank you for the confirmation.
Chrysalis snorted once, waving a hoof.
Another mindless drone to add to the horde of ponies.
She stated flatly.
You sicken me. Leave my presence.
Without another word, Chrysalis motioned towards the ceiling with her horn, and a long black staircase descended. A changeling queen stepped out to the stairs before they magically retracted, sealing the room from outside interference. Before the stairs were fully closed, though, Warren caught sight of what appeared to be a tattered pony plushie on Chrysalis's bed. He was sure he saw a glimpse of a dirty blue mane, and then the stairs closed. She knew we were there the whole time? Warren asked, rubbing a hoof against his temple.
She probably sensed me the moment I entered the Badlands. Probably came out to meet us at the Stonewolf as some kind of reconnaissance.
Kuno said with a shake of her head.
Come on, we're leaving.
As they were walking back through the horde of changelings, Warren was pushed to the ground by a changeling, and then a zap of magic hit him in the face. In an instant, Kuno was at his side, dragging him away.
Come on, run!
Warren bounded after her, his heart thudding in his ears, trying to wipe his face to figure out what had happened to it. After a few minutes of running, Warren had to stop, taking shelter with Kuno behind a rock formation. Warren's mind was buzzing with something from the magical hit, and it was hard to focus. Got me right in the face, he murmured, rubbing a hoof against his cheek. Kuno gave a worried frown, scooching closer to him and lifting her hoofs tenderly, stroke over his cheeks.
Doesn't look to be any damage. Maybe an attempted stun? Doesn't seem to have done too much damage.
Warren nodded, wincing faintly and grimacing. Feels like my entire head is numb. Or maybe just my mind. Like I haven't slept in days. Kuno gave a worried frown at that, leaning forward and kissing his nose, and then his lips purring softly.
Let me kiss it better.
Warren blinked once, his brows raising, before he purred faintly and leaned into the kiss, throwing a hoof around the changeling. A smile spread across Kuno's face, and she shifted closer, trailing a hoof down his form.
Doesn't all this danger just excite you?
The changeling whispered faintly, a lustful note in her tone. Warren nodded dumbly, pressing into Kuno's form eagerly. A roar from nearby made them both look up. Kuno's eyes widened and she leaned aside to peer towards the tower.
Dragon!
She hissed, in a warning, pushing at Warren's shoulder.
Hide!
They have a dragon? Warren asked, his eyes wide, pressing himself against the rock with a scared whimper.
Yeah, that's it.
Kuno stuttered.
They have a dragon.
A shadow passed over them, and Warren looked up to see the golden eyes of a blue dragon staring straight down at them.
It sees us,
Warren whimpered, clasping his hooves around Kuno tightly, staring fearfully up at the flying shape. With a shaky sigh, he pushed the changeling away and then stepped away from the rock. Run, Kuno, I'll distract it! I'd never outrun it anyhow. Run! Kuno glanced up at the dragon, back at him, and then immediately turned away, taking to the air and sprinting towards the tower at top speed. Warren barely spared her a glance, focusing on the dragon. He swallowed hard, closing his eyes as the dragon got closer. A swoop of wings, and Warren was snatched up by the dragon's large paw, carried away. Warren found it amazing that even in the claws of the dragon he was getting bored. It had been a full hour since the dragon had swooped down and snatched him up, and now he was resting, albeit comfortably, in the dragon's large paw. Escape was impossible. He had already tried to wiggle out. The fall to the ground would be fatal with his broken wing either way. Another half an hour and Warren felt the paw shift. There was the sensation of them dropping, and then he was deposited delicately on the shore of a river. He blinked up at the dragon uncertainly, his eyes wide. The dragon snorted once, smoke rising from its nostrils, staring down at him in response. Warren gave an uncertain motion of a hoof.
big dragon. Please don't eat me. The dragon snorted again, seemingly amused. It twisted its head, leaning in close and staring at him. A large paw lifted, and a single claw extended. Warren jerked back from the claw, closing his eyes and waiting for it to grind him into the ground. The claw tip delicately touched his forehead, and then suddenly his mind cleared. Suddenly Warren was aware of everything. The magic blast in the crowd of changelings had worked. It had tricked him into thinking that the changeling he went with was Kuno. It hadn't been. Warren looked up at the dragon with a sudden new understanding, eyes wide. Kuno? He squeaked. The dragon gave a wry smile at that, and then shivered all over. A flash of green encompassed its form, and a puff of smoke filled the air around it. Kuno came staggering out of the smoke, giving a cough that sent forth a single tongue of flame. She looked up at Warren with a weary smile.
Bloody changelings,
Kuno murmured before she collapsed.